All right, shall we?
Sure.
I'm gonna hit go on the stopwatch. Welcome to Why Not Change the World, the RPI podcast, where we bring together leading experts who are tackling pressing issues from different angles. I'm your host, Reeve Hamilton, and on this episode, we're talking about Alzheimer's disease and cutting-edge research. I'm joined by Deepak Vashish, Director of the Center for Biotechnology and Interdisciplinary Studies at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
Hi, Reeve. Happy to be here.
Thanks for being here. And Mariana Figueroa, the Director of the Lighting Research Center at Rensselaer.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you both for joining us. And now you both do research related to the treatment of Alzheimer's disease, but you come at it from very different angles and from angles that some people might be surprised to hear about. So could you sort of both fill me in on what you do, maybe Mariana, starting with you?
Sure. We come in at what we call the non-pharmacological intervention angle, where we use light as a way to help Alzheimer's disease patients sleep better, improve mood, and improve behavior. So we're more on the treating the symptoms than treating the disease. And obviously there is no cure for Alzheimer's, so there's a lot of people with Alzheimer's that have the symptoms, and one of the worst symptoms they have is this lack of a consolidated rest activity rhythm or consolidated sleep-wake cycle. So what we're doing with light, we're treating that, or at least we're helping them sleep better, which has been shown to have numerous positive outcomes.
And Deepak, what are you working on?
So my training is in working on bone, and one could ask what has bone to do with brain. Only thing we know is the term bonehead. So thinking about brain, we came to this approach of trying to link two different systems. So there is the brain and there is bone. And then one can ask what has bone to do with brain and vice versa. So if you go back into skeletal evolution and general evolution in general, cognition has been synonymous with vertebrates. And yet nobody has looked into in a larger sense that how does the vertebra or the skeletal system affects brain, because they both develop simultaneously. So we started asking that question, that can bone affect brain? And once we figure that relationship out, if one exists, and we're working on that part, how do we capitalize on that relationship to understand Alzheimer's, that what may possibly go wrong? And there are studies around which are coming up which have been showing that bones may have a lot to do with the brain development and even with Alzheimer's.
Well, and both of these, both coming at it from the bone angle and the lighting angle, strike me as maybe not the first thing that someone on the street might think of when they hear the word Alzheimer's. So Mariana, maybe could you explain, how did you come to be working on this? How did you get drawn to lighting in the first place?
Well, as everyone working in lighting, we say that your high school counselor will not tell you, you should go to lighting. Nobody will say that. You really come into lighting by accident, and then I did it by accident too. I'm an architect by training, and when I came to RPI, I was looking for a master's or a PhD program in the area of architecture, and I saw the Lighting Research Center, and I thought, oh, that's very interesting. I thought I was going to be doing lighting design until I started working with research in lighting, and I really fell in love with it. And more to it, I fell in love with the impact that light has on our circadian rhythms. So I started understanding circadian rhythms, which are every rhythm in our body that repeats at approximately every 24 hours. For example, sleep-wake cycle, it's a great example of circadian rhythms. And it is the major synchronizer of all our biological systems to the local position on Earth, and it's very powerful. So I became really interested. I started working with nurses in night shift and trying to use light to help them maintain alertness during the night shift. And when I did my master's, I wasn't sleeping more than 3 hours in a row, and I saw how hard it is not to sleep. So it really became a passion for me. And then I started trying to find applications that we could use light. And one of the earliest applications I worked with was with Alzheimer's disease patients. And the first time I was in a nursing home, it had a huge impact on me. And just being able to help them in such a simple way. You know, when I talk to people about what I do, they look at me and say, "Oh, that's really cool. I never thought about it." And I'm thinking it is such a simple and yet such a powerful tool that we can have, because we have daylight during the day every day, sunrises and sunsets, and we kind of take it for granted. So I think that to me was a big revelation, and I think people then say, "Oh, yes, that is really powerful," and they start understanding. So that's how we ended up working with Alzheimer's, and we saw early on very, very good results, and that's where we started investing more time and effort in this area.
Well, the people that are affected by circadian rhythms and the sleep-wake cycle, that's not exclusive to Alzheimer's.
No, it's not. It's everybody, from premature infants to older adults with Alzheimer's. And, you think about your teenager son or daughter that can't go to bed before 1 o'clock in the morning. That has to do with circadian rhythms. You think about, we're working now with cancer patients in the hospitals who spend 2-3 weeks in hospitals that have absolutely no robust light dark pattern, because we tend to have very dim, constant light in the built environment. You have office workers that have no windows and that go to work in the dark, come back in the dark. You have seasonal depression. You have jet lag. So there's so many applications that I think we use the Alzheimer's as sort of a systems model in a way. You learn everything with Alzheimer's. If it works with Alzheimer's, it's probably going to work with all the other populations.
Deepak, what drew you into this world? As you mentioned, you were researching bone issues.
So a couple things is, one, we were looking into bone and we were looking into diabetes. And if you look at some of the older literature, Alzheimer's has been described as type 3 diabetes. And that was the link we wanted to explore, that what is the link between diabetes and Alzheimer's. And I have to thank Mariana for introducing me to that field. She had some very fabulous models which were manipulating multiple systems, including bone. So we got interested in looking at the effect of altered circadian rhythm with diabetes into bone. And then that led to the interest in Alzheimer's, because it's one of a significant challenge of our time. And there is significant discussion in the research community, especially the National Institutes of Health, as to how we can collectively address that situation. And I wear also the hat of directing the Center for Biotechnology, and the idea was that, can we bring all the expertise we have in-house, where people are working on different problems, together to address Alzheimer's? So sort of bringing a new angle to Alzheimer's. And we formed an interdisciplinary research group, and Mariana was a big contributor to that, and she led that group. And we all came together, looked at ways in which we can address the problem. And my interest came out of that, and we started trying to look at how we can enhance understanding of brain and Alzheimer's through what we know about bone.
Yeah, and can a problem like Alzheimer's be solved without an interdisciplinary approach? I mean, that's something we talk about here at Rensselaer quite a lot. Can you talk about what that has meant for your work? Instead of being in a silo, I guess, what is the benefit of interdisciplinary work?
Sure. So I can give you sort of a rundown of how interdisciplinary it can get. So we've heard the description from a light and circadian rhythm point of view, that how it may affect a person's cognitive ability and predisposition to Alzheimer's. But think of a very complex problem where a particular system may produce a protein, which can then go through the gut and may get modified. And depending on the modification, it may act as a hormone. Then it passes through the bloodstream, goes through the blood-brain barrier into the brain to a receptor, affecting your brain function. There are a lot of chances to that happening and not happening. There is a lot of data which is generated. There is a lot of measurements which may need to be made, like whether somebody is fully cognitively present or absent. And then, you put it all together in a system where you can look at if we want to manipulate this process, can we come up with new therapeutics? So certainly you've thrown in all sorts of discipline in there. And you may notice that I didn't bring in medicine yet. So this is not the clinical angle. This is all the preclinical part. So we can do all that kind of research. And I think the ecosystem at Rensselaer in particular has been very conducive to that kind of research. Which is the new polytechnic model which we approach, where people are coming from very different disciplines. When we got together, and maybe Mariana can comment on that first, half of the people said, we don't work in Alzheimer's. Why are we in this group? Then we started talking, and then came out, a lot of interesting projects. Maybe you want to comment on that, Mariana?
Yeah, it's very interesting because, to Deepak's point, is that one of the first things that came out of it was the idea of writing a training grant, and I have to give National Institutes on Aging credit for that. They were looking at a training grant that would really bring different facets to the Alzheimer's disease research, and that included bring engineering to big data engineering, techniques that are not typically used in medicine to medicine, because there is no cure for Alzheimer's. When you stop and think about it, you can get cure for cancer, but there is no cure for Alzheimer's. And the goal is by 2024, which is getting close, but that the goal for NIH is that by 2024 there will be an Alzheimer's patient survivor. And I think that for us to be able to accomplish that, it has to come from that interdisciplinary group of people thinking differently, with different skill sets, with different techniques that can be applied to the problem that we're trying to solve, which is, can we come up with a cure for Alzheimer's? And I think, it is true that when we start talking about all the different skill sets that we have at Rensselaer, that was an ideal place, and that was one of the main reasons why it was awarded to us, was because, we were bringing in something very different to training grants that typically goes to medical schools.
Yeah, that's one thing that's striking is that, Deepak mentioned that he did that whole list of things that we're working on that without even bringing medicine into it yet. Are people surprised when you guys talk to them and you talk about working at Rensselaer, which of course is the first technological university in the country, but we don't have a medical school? How does that affect sort of perceptions about what you can and can't do, and are those right or wrong?
So I think the example of training grant which Mariana brought in is a very interesting one, because it almost tells the medical community that there is an alternative approach, which is very much embedded in science, which we can bring in to address Alzheimer's. And one of the interesting examples, which is very translational, as well coming out of this work is Chunyu Wang's work, which has been funded by Warren Alpert Foundation. And he's been able to identify a novel compound, which is a potential drug target for Alzheimer's. And that's a combination of people working from our biological sciences department with faculty from chemical and biological engineering. And of course, having some interesting in vivo models to evaluate that. So within a short period, I think this approach has been very successful and interesting.
Yeah, I think I do a lot of work on the clinical area. So I literally work with patients, Alzheimer's disease patients, and you're absolutely right. When I first started my tenure track position, I had some people questioning whether I was going to make it or not, because said, you're in an engineering school, you're doing work in medicine, how can you make it? And I think the key is collaboration. I think that's one thing that we all do well here, is the ability to collaborate, and we have collaborated with nursing schools, with medical schools. We collaborate with physicians in the area. Just practitioners that are in the Capital District, we collaborate with them. They are the ones that help us find the population that we need to find. I think collaboration is the key. The fact that, and they see the benefit. They see that there's a new way to look at the problem, and they see it as a benefit to collaborate with us. So I think that's one way that we went around the problem. And it has worked so far. We have not had any issues with that.
Right. And the lighting therapies that you've developed are in healthcare facilities, is my understanding.
Correct.
And maybe that can sort of transition us into what does the future of Alzheimer's treatment and research look like? I imagine some of those things that you've developed are involved.
I have to say that our solutions are really nice because first of all, they're non-pharmacological, so they can be used with any other treatments or any other drugs. And that's the first thing. And the second thing is that they're just obvious. You know, it's like even if you don't want to buy a new fixture or a new light bulb, you can go outdoors every day, or you can sit by a window every day at the same time, and that's what you're getting in terms of the light. So I think it is so simple that it's kind of like easy to take it for granted, which we all do. And my really dream is that every hospital, every nursing home, every assisted living has that type of lighting just built in it without even thinking. You shouldn't be thinking about, do I need to go outdoors now? You should be receiving the light you need in the built environment, and people should be able to install that. It's almost like you think about ergonomic chairs. Nobody questions whether you should have or you should not have ergonomic chairs in your office or a computer. Lighting should be the same thing. People shouldn't even question. You should just have it. And hopefully that's what's going to happen.
I think future of Alzheimer is very much tied to future of human life as we are getting older and we have a large proportion of aging population. We are looking at issues such as Alzheimer's, and there are other diseases like osteoporosis and other things which are all happening in the older age groups. And there is a movement out there which is pushing to characterize aging itself as a disease and to see, can we treat aging? Can we stop people from becoming old? And as we discover processes which are involved in Alzheimer's and maybe in osteoporosis and osteoarthritis and other problems, we'll find, I'm a big believer, we'll find a common link between those two. And with common link, there is a potential to come up with common therapeutic approaches which will address all these issues which affect quality of life very severely. So I think as we are aging, we're looking for solutions for improving the quality of life and also to extend the number of years. And I think solutions for Alzheimer's will enable that, and vice versa, other solutions will enable addressing Alzheimer's.
And do you have a sense of where your own research is headed in this area?
Well, I think for me, the exciting part is the brain now, and I can thank Mariana for that introduction, that I find that area very fascinating. It's one of the new frontiers of research, trying to understand more about brain, but through that understanding, we're finding a lot more about the rest of the human body as well. So I think this may be a start of an era where we start looking, and I use the analogy that brain is our top of our body, and we draw arrows from brain down to all the other organ system. I think this is a time where we'll start drawing arrows in all random direction, that everything is a system, and we function as a system, we behave as a system, and it's time to understand that system with a new angle coming in, that is the brain.
And moving forward, Mariana, you're sort of working with the environment around people, you're working inside people. And you've addressed this to some extent already, but how do you bring these two things together? Maybe you guys specifically, or just researchers out there?
Yeah, I think, I think they have a fancy name for that now. They call it epigenetics, which is really how the environment affects people and affects your body. And you can't really dissociate the gene and the environment, I think. So I think that, ultimately that's what we need to do. It's the bench to bedside idea. is that, you use the bench really to learn the mechanisms, but, to Deepak's point, is it's a systems approach. So you can go down to a little thing, understand that, but then you have to start coming out of that and start getting it more into the system. And eventually you have to look at how is the system going to react to the environment. So I think that, and then you have to look at how the environment is going to impact the system. Like, for example, there's this hypothesis that breast cancer, for example, is a childhood disease, that it's an insult that you receive when you're going from pre-puberty to puberty, and then later in life, if you, for example, do shift work, which is an insult to your body, that imprinting that was done when you were a teenager comes out. So you need to start thinking, and I think NIH is thinking about that. It's really looking at, from the time you're born, what's your environment? How are you raised? And how does that may lead to later on in life having Alzheimer's disease or having a disease? So I think that longitudinal idea of looking at a person throughout life, that's where we're going to go, I think, in the research. And that's, that requires even more collaborations, more different skill sets, because you need to start thinking about how the environment affects biology.
Are there any big questions lingering out there that either of you are particularly fascinated by that we don't know about Alzheimer's that you hope we find out soon?
I think there's a lot of things that we don't know about it. Personally, I think that we're looking at different ways to use light. There's a lot of people doing neurostimulation. We're looking at light as a tool for that. And I think, everybody's in search of a biomarker. I don't think we have it. One of the areas that I'm particularly very interested in learning more is the impact of sleep and sleep deprivation on the development of Alzheimer's. I think that in the past 5 years we learned a lot and how important it is. They're now considering sleep as a risk factor for Alzheimer's, and because it's basically, in a very simple way, when you sleep, you clean up the debris that you accumulate during waking hours. And if you don't sleep, you're not cleaning up that debris. So you're allowing that to be accumulating in the brain, which is in the form of the plaques, which are, the hallmark for the disease. So I think if people start understanding that, you can start thinking about changing behavior and changing what we're doing, because it's a badge of honor nowadays for people not to sleep. Oh, I only got 4 hours sleep last night, and, I'm better than everybody else. And I guess we're learning that that's not the case. So I think understanding that pathway and understanding what the relationship is, it's something that I'm personally very interested in and start looking at. And I think the other area is also using things like big data and, artificial intelligence and machine learning to understand how, say, sleep can affect your Alzheimer's disease risk, for example.
I mean, I'll piggyback onto that part, is that Mariana brought up the idea of cleaning up the damage when you sleep, and from a very fundamental cellular point of view, we are interested in reactive oxygen species, that how they will cause changes in DNA, more specifically looking at the interaction between the mitochondrial DNA and the cellular DNA as a fundamental process, that how it affects aging as a process, and then how it has an impact on Alzheimer's, leading downstream events like plaque buildup and loss of cognition. And I think the data data runs through this whole thing. It's the river which connects everything. And I think we talked about the importance of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And at Rensselaer, we are also very fortunate to have a large effort in the form of Institute of Data Exploration and Application. And we've seen that with some of the projects which have come out to link circadian rhythm to protein to cellular function, all the way going to outside body. So data allows it to go from inside the body all the way to outside to a clinical perspective. So I think that's an important part of the future.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to it. Well, Mariana, Deepak, thank you both for coming and for spending some time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Why Not Change the World is recorded in the Soloist Suite at NPAC, the Curtis R. Preem Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Thank you to the NPAC staff for their assistance, and thank you for listening.